Hi, thank you very much for having me. I'm just going to pop this down here. I'll use the microphone because I've been screaming at my kids all day. I'm nervous. I don't normally stand up in front of groups like this. Usually it's the press I stand up in front of. So I've been nervous since Nanny told me to be here at 5 o'clock. So I haven't slept all afternoon. But I work on my own most of the time. And when I say on my own, I work from an office in Norwich or from home, but I have a small group of people who are distributed around Europe. We have we have Olga in Russia and Pedro in Spain and Laura in Italy and Veronique in France, and we only employ national stereotypes. But these people help me to distribute material on behalf of my clients to the press around Europe. So it's pretty straightforward. We spend half our time producing content and we spend half our time placing content. And the clients I'm talking about are typically technology clients. And this is not the technology that the press talks about these days. This is manufacturing technology. So these are, for example, machines and software, things that make things that make physical objects. So the sorts of press and magazines that we're dealing with tend to be trade and industry magazines, or they tend to be technical journals, that kind of thing. So the content is everything for the people, obviously the people who are reading those magazines and watching those videos. So I'm not here to talk about the way we produce things, because digital photography and video is ubiquitous these days, and we are using simple digital technology to communicate as much as we can with as many different publishers and as many different publications as we can. And like I said, the intention is to get as much press coverage as we possibly can, to get messages across. And typically those messages are quite technical, but I'm going to talk about what I've learned, I suppose, over the past 10 or 12 years. My company is called MBMC, which originally was Matt Bailey Marketing Communications. 12 or 14 years ago, I was working as a junior director for a software company in Reading, within the manufacturing industry sector still. And I got a bit bored with the 9 to 5, and I thought I'd try something on my own. I kind of liked writing, I sort of liked taking photographs. One of my old employers started giving me work, and pretty soon I found it sort of snowballed, and I've been doing it now for, like I say, 12 or 14 years. And a few years ago, 2008, when the sky fell in and everybody wondered what the hell was going to happen next, I went to my client and said, well, you should be looking at new ways of reaching your audience. And I called my company MBMC Business Media Productions. And the intention was just to use more digital media to reach their audience. And typically, companies in the manufacturing sector are not always the quickest to pick up on new technologies, ironically, because obviously they're using them to make their products. Anyway, which one do I press? That one. Okay, so like I said, I want to talk a bit about the things I've learned and the things I've seen and the trends I've observed, I suppose, in the past few years. Now, I have a handful of clients that I've kept for 10 or 12 years. And a couple of them in particular have paid for me to travel the world and to see how things are being made, how people are actually making things. And I travel most months, and now that I have 2 small children, I don't travel as much as I used to. But on Saturday, I'm off to Toronto. Last week, I was in Holland. Try and keep it to sort of 1 trip a month. But I go to see companies that are making things, and I talk to people about how they're using my clients' products, and then we turn that into content that we then place. So they're case studies, white papers, that kind of thing. I also get invited occasionally to write editorials for various newspapers and magazines and things. Like I said, typically industry press, technical press, rather than mainstream media. And I guess what I've noticed is one of the reasons why I agreed to come along and speak this evening is because I know that Hot Source has been looking at 3D printing recently, and this is particularly interesting. It's a subject close to my heart. Some of my clients are in the 3D printing industry, they're in the rapid prototyping industry, and there's a lot of coverage in the mainstream media about 3D printing. And my feeling is that 3D printing is being overhyped. It's a great technology, it's exciting, it's interesting. From the media's point of view, it makes good copy, it's sexy, it's something that the general public are getting very excited about. But what I've been witnessing over the past 10, 15 years of working in manufacturing technology is a revolution that's been going on that hasn't been reported. And it has had, and it is having, very profound socio-economic implications or repercussions. And for the sake of this presentation, I've called it the democratization of the means of production. Most of you are familiar with the idea of the means of production. It used to be owned by the mill owners, for example. It used to be in the hands of the rich, the wealthy, people who could afford to invest in the technology. In manufacturing, it used to be in the hands of the big corporations with the big budgets that could afford to invest in the big, technical, clever machines to make things. Well, that's no longer the case. Things have changed considerably. And one of my clients in particular, a company based in Southern California, have been in the midst of that revolution, and they have partly created it and they've partly ridden the wave. And that's given me a fantastic opportunity to observe globally what's been going on. I've been to China, Canada, North America, India a couple of times. I go all over Europe, and it's quite a privilege. In 2005, a New York Times journalist called Thomas Friedman wrote a book called The World is Flat, which is a fascinating book. And in it, he talks about how technologies such as, communication technologies are flattening the playing field, leveling the playing field for individuals and companies all over the world. So, for example, famously, call centers in India, because of the fiber optic cables that were laid down 20 years ago, mostly by American companies, are now enabling students and young people in India to get good jobs in call centers or use other technologies to compete with individuals and companies anywhere else in the world. So it doesn't matter where you are, you have access to this technology, you have access to the communications, and you can do business and you can compete. And I've seen that firsthand. I've been to India a couple of times and I've witnessed it. I've eaten in the restaurants which are populated predominantly by young Indians who are taking advantage of this technology and are taking jobs that traditionally were based in this country or based in the higher cost European countries. So from a manufacturing point of view, it's the biggest industrial revolution you haven't heard of. Most people haven't heard of. Unless, for example, you're into, say, mountain biking or any of those other sort of relatively modern sports where people seem to know about CNC, computer numerical controlled machines making parts either in one-offs or sometimes pretty big quantities. Famously, Apple produced one of their models of laptop, from a solid lump of aluminium, and they machine every case. And in China, they have a factory, which I've seen, which has 1,000 CNC vertical machining centers lined up producing these things at a phenomenal rate. But they're made, it's sort of mass production in batches of one was a phrase that was coined 10 or so years ago. So these machines, this manufacturing technology is available to everyone, wherever you are. The client that I've been working for the past, actually for 16 years, first as an employee for their UK distributor, which coincidentally is based here in Norwich, and then after that on a freelance basis, and I continue to work for them on a freelance basis. It's a privately owned company, it's in Southern California, and 20 or so years ago, they came out with a very low-cost CNC machine tool. And again, let me reiterate, CNC means computer numerical control. So this is very early digitally controlled machines to make solid objects. So this is quite some time ago. In fact, these machines first came over from Japan about 30 or 35 years ago, and they were driven by paper tape and card. And these days, of course, they're as sophisticated as anything else, any other piece of digital equipment you'll see. The difference is these days, and thanks to companies like this particular company, they are available to almost everyone and anyone. They're not difficult to use. And this is, like I said, a revolution, I suppose, in the way things are made that has not been reported in the press. And we all benefit from this technology. Everything we use, everything we take for granted in everyday life, every product that we fetishize, it starts life with a CNC machine tool. If it's plastic, typically the molds and dies are made on a CNC machine. Like I said before, some products like Mac products or mountain bike products are machined from solid. So this is a technology that's revolutionized the way things are made. This particular client of mine, Haas, like I said, started 20 years ago. They're now $1 billion a year company. They're one of several players in this particular sector, but they have shaped the industry quite considerably simply by the products they've developed and the products they put out there in the market. Now they have 125,000 plus machines out there. And when you think these machines typically sell for between 30,000 and 50,000 pounds, that's a lot of machines. And they're selling at the rate of about 12,500 to 13,000 machines a year. So that's a lot of money. It's a big company. It's still privately owned. And they're aiming to be a $2 billion a year company. And I think they will be in the next 3 to 5 years. Now, what we do for them, one of the things we do for them is we produce their in-house, their customer magazine, which goes to around about 300,000 people around the world, existing customers and customers on their database, prospects on their database. Now, again, this is a very simple thing, but when the current director of marketing joined the company, companies like this didn't produce their own in-house customer magazines, the kind of thing you get on a flight on BA, for example, or the kind of thing you get when you buy a Mercedes or a BMW, apparently. But we produce these magazines to show people. They're full of stories about how people use these machines around the world. And they're fascinating because they're normal people, and they're not typically engineers, and they're not typically people from engineering backgrounds. But they're people with ideas, and this is the great differentiator, if you like. Whether it's a 3D printing machine or a CNC machine, it's people with ideas who are making the products they have in their heads, perhaps often with no prior experience. They're turning their hands to something which to a lot of people would be prohibitively technical or complex or intimidating. But in actual fact, it's getting easier. It's getting very easy. So it doesn't matter whether you're based in Europe or in North America or in India or in Taiwan, anywhere around the world, if you have access to a reliable power source and you have an idea that you want to put into production, if you contact a company like this, like Haas or one of the other players in their particular sector, and you want to buy one of these machines, of course, they'll find a way for you to buy one. So this is like I said, it has profound implications for wealth creation around the world. So I'll give you a few examples of people I've been to see. And this guy in Germany, he worked for a mountain bike company in the US, and when he finished working for them as a student, he came back to Germany and he started making his own mountain bikes. And if you're a mountain bike enthusiast, you'll know that Nikolai is a very, very well-known brand, and it's the kind of thing, again, that couldn't have been done 20 years ago, but is possible now because of the technology, because of the availability of the technology. And here, this is a company in Ukraine that makes light aircraft, a company called Aeropract. Two gentlemen who worked in the Soviet Union's biggest aircraft manufacturer 25 years ago, set up and created their own light aircraft company on the third floor of a tower block in Ukraine, in Kiev, in the center of Ukraine, which is quite remarkable. Quite unbelievable until you see it, that people are building aircraft in the middle of a city center. And this is an example from the UK. This gentleman turned a hobby into a very viable business. He makes motorized tanks for enthusiasts all over the world. These things sell for £5,000 or £6,000. And again, no previous experience. An amateur model maker who turned his passion into a very profitable, viable business. My client, Haas, have also invested in creating Haas Technical Education Centres all around Europe. And the idea here is to give students the opportunity to get their hands on these machines to see what they can do. And this is a young lady at a school in Toulouse. And there's been a lot of copy in the press recently, a lot of comments in the press recently about the growing army of unemployed graduates has been called a social disaster. In this country, of course, for the past 20 years, we've been investing in education, education, education. And it's interesting because the social disaster that people are talking about, some journalists are talking about, is unemployed graduates with enormous loans that they can't pay off, and they're applying for jobs where degrees are not necessary, and they are, for example, trying to get jobs as baristas for Costa Coffee, or that sort of level of job, when they've been promised something quite different. So Ken Robinson, who's an educationalist and an author, and one of the most watched TED videos, I gather, said suddenly degrees aren't worth anything, which is a pretty controversial thing to say. But I've worked closely with this network of Haas technical education centres around Europe, and there are now about 75 of them, and about 150 in the US. And what I'm witnessing is young people who typically, and this applied to my school when I was there, who weren't particularly academic, were streamed, they were pushed into the practical subjects, such as woodwork and metalwork, for example. And they were kind of written off in a way. And if they could work well with their hands, they were guided towards jobs in engineering and those sorts of things, and manufacturing. And what I'm seeing at schools around Europe, and these Haas technical education centres are affiliated to well-known schools and universities, is these young people who were previously written off as non-academic, or perhaps they come from troubled backgrounds, are being given an opportunity to learn something using these machines, using this technology. And ironically, they're not the ones who are coming out of college with enormous loans. They're not the ones who are applying for low-grade jobs with very few prospects. They're the ones who are starting up their own businesses and turning their ideas into real products. And many of these kids, and I've been to see them, are running businesses that are paying them 50, 60, 70,000 euros a year, and they're 1 or 2 years out of college. And this is not happening in this country. And it could so easily happen in this country. And I guess, although I said that I feel like 3D printing gets a lot of press coverage, if it gets more people into the ideas of working for themselves and manufacturing things, then that's got to be a good thing, because we need things more than ever. Everybody likes a nice product, and it's great. You know, the amazing work that we can produce digitally is fantastic, and there's been a real revolution in the way people produce content and videos and photography, etc. But there's also really a very strong need economically, socially, and individually and personally for making things. And this is a graphic I borrowed from an author I'm not particularly keen on. His name is Dan Pink, but he wrote a book a few years back called A Whole New Mind. And the idea here is that we've ascended from right the way through the agricultural, the industrial, the knowledge worker periods, eventually to get to this point where we're all supposed to be creative. We have the technologies and the opportunity to not just be, I think this fella here is supposed to be a doctor, but also to be creative in some way. And the technology is there now to actually make your ideas, not just to create things in 2 dimensions, but to actually create things in 3 dimensions. How are we doing for time, Nanya?
Yeah, you're getting.
Okay. So I just want to say, I met this fella here, like I said at the end here, is a doctor. I met a guy in New York who had a small practice. He was a cardiosurgeon, and he came from Eastern Europe, and he migrated to the US, and he had an idea for a heart valve, a left ventricular assist device, which he wanted to put into production. Well, he bought a small computer-controlled machine and learnt to use the CAD-CAM and designed his first products on the 15th floor of a New York skyscraper. And he implants those valves into the hearts of his patients, which I think is the point we've come to, where individuals with specialized knowledge can, if they wish, create things in 3D, create real products that they can actually use in their professions. Great. Thank you very much.